Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, I'm bringing you a story unlike anything you've heard before. A tale of war, but not just the usual battles and explosions. This is a story about warriors who defy all expectations, a story about those who don't just fight to win, but treat war as an art, a puzzle to solve, a game where victory is already in their hands long before the first shot is fired. In this story, you'll witness the incredible and unimaginable creativity of humans in warfare. Warriors who never accept defeat, who don't just wield advanced weaponry, but transform simple tools into terrifying instruments of combat. But the most remarkable part? They're not just great at fighting. They understand the true cost of war, and know when to walk away without ever raising a weapon. So, what is it that makes humans the gods of war? And why are they considered the most dangerous species in the galaxy? Join me as we step into the world of war, where creativity, strategy, and determination have created legends. But before we dive into this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of the exciting stories I have in store for you. Now, let's get started with today's story. The Grizzled Veteran's story. The grizzled veteran sat at the corner of the dimly lit space station bar, his worn mandibles clicking intermittently, a nervous habit he couldn't quite shake. His compound eyes glinted in the low light, reflecting the faint shimmer of the station's artificial atmosphere. The stale scent of recycled air filled the room, blending with the quiet hum of distant machinery. In his grip, the drink he nursed seemed to be the only thing anchoring him to the present, though it was clear his thoughts were a million miles away. The young journalist watched him intently, her antennae flicking nervously as she weighed the weight of what he was about to say. He had the look of someone who had seen things that made his presence in a bar like this almost too heavy to bear. There were rumors, of course. Whispers of humanity's infamous war with the Empire, the Cthulhu conflict, where so many brave veterans had fallen, and so many others refused to speak of it. Most of them, when asked, would either shrug it off or change the subject. But not him. He was different. The tension in the air seemed to stretch as he finally broke the silence, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that sounded like it had been etched from years of struggle and sorrow. You want to know why we lost the war? His voice was almost a growl, laden with memories too painful to hide. For a brief moment, the journalist thought he might not say another word. But then he looked up at her, those piercing eyes catching hers. And his lips parted with a dry chuckle. The sound was harsh and bitter, the kind of laugh that didn't belong to someone who found humor in anything. I'll tell you, he continued, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, as though sharing a dark secret. It wasn't because we didn't have the technology. It wasn't because we lacked the weapons or the firepower. No, it was something far worse. The journalist's antennae twitched in interest, her body unconsciously leaning forward, hungry for what he was about to say. She had heard plenty about humanity's warfare, of course, the reports, the logs, the analyses. But never had she heard anything like this. And from the look in the veteran's eyes, she could tell there was more to this story than anyone had ever let on. We never stood a chance, the veteran continued, shaking his head slowly. His voice had grown softer, almost as if he were speaking to himself, recalling a memory he could never escape. His fingers tightened around the glass, his knuckles going white. Against those psychotic primates. They fought differently. And we never understood it. We thought we could win by numbers, by tactics, by precision. But humanity? They didn't play by any rules we knew. The veteran paused, looking off into the distance as if the memories were playing out in front of him, the faces of fallen comrades and the chaos of battle swirling in his mind. The journalist remained silent, waiting for him to speak again, feeling the pull of something greater than simple curiosity. This wasn't just a war story. It was something deeper. Something that threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew about the universe, and the creatures in it. Take our first engagement with them, he began, his voice turning colder. As though each word was an icy shard of reality. We thought we were ready. We had the most advanced battle formations, tactical AI that could predict the next move of our enemies with perfect accuracy. We thought we were unstoppable. But the humans? His laugh came again, this time bitterer. They looked at our perfect formations and laughed. Laughed like we were children playing a game. Then they started, throwing rocks. The journalist blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. Rocks? She asked, her antennae twitching in disbelief. You mean projectiles, like stones? He nodded, his gaze hardening as he recalled the unimaginable. Rocks. Not just any rocks, though, tungsten rods, dropped from orbit. Do you have any idea what happens when you drop a chunk of metal the size of a telephone pole from the edge of space? It's not just a rock. It's a weapon of mass destruction. Pure kinetic energy. No radiation, no energy signatures to detect, just death. From above. The journalist's mind raced as she processed what he was saying. It didn't make sense. Dropping rocks from space. That was absurd. Primitive. But his words were tinged with something deeper, something far more terrifying than mere tactics. The look in his eyes made it clear, this was no joke. This was the way humans fought. And it was unlike anything they had ever encountered. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he took another long, slow sip of his drink. We thought we had them. We thought we had the advantage. We were outnumbering them 10-1, at least. But humans? They thrive when they're outnumbered. They don't panic. They don't flee. They fight. And they fight like they've been preparing for it their entire lives. We thought we knew combat. We thought we had the upper hand. But humanity, they don't see combat the way we do. They don't think in the same terms. They think differently. They make war into something beautiful, in a way. His voice trailed off, the words hanging in the air like a weight too heavy to carry. The journalist's antennae were now fully raised, her curiosity piqued beyond measure. What was he trying to tell her? How had humans managed to turn warfare into something more than just violence? She leaned in closer, her voice barely a whisper as she asked, "What do you mean, beautiful?" War is destruction. It's chaos. The veteran looked at her, his expression darkening. That's what you think, he said softly. But that's not how humans see it. For them, war isn't just about fighting, it's about strategy. About outthinking your enemy. About solving a puzzle. The tactics, the creativity, they turned warfare into an art form. The art of human warfare, the veteran's voice dropped to a low, gravelly whisper as he leaned closer, his mandibles twitching with tension. The thing is, he began, pausing to take another sip of his drink, humans don't see war like we do. To us, it's a science, a calculation. Strategy, numbers, and the best equipment win the day. But to them? War is an art. It's something they've perfected for centuries, long before they ever left their planet. His voice seemed to carry a weight of respect, though it was laced with the bitter aftertaste of defeat. The journalist furrowed her brow, still processing his words. An art? She asked skeptically. How could war be an art? War is chaos. The veteran nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as memories, both painful and awe-inspiring, resurfaced. To humans, war is something they've been mastering for millennia. While we were busy building plasma rifles and perfecting energy shields, they were perfecting death. But not just any kind of death, they were perfecting the art of it. He paused, his eyes locking with hers as if trying to impress upon her the gravity of his words. Do you know how they began? They didn't have advanced weapons, not at first. They didn't have plasma cannons or energy beams. They had sticks. Stones. Spears. He shook his head slowly, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. And they used them like artists use brushes. They learned how to kill with everything around them. Every material, every tool, they used it to turn killing into something elegant. Something precise. The journalist's antennae twitched in confusion. But, how? That sounds primitive. How can something so basic be seen as an art? The veteran's compound eyes glinted in the low light of the bar, reflecting something deep, something ancient. You don't understand, he said, a note of reverence creeping into his voice. They see war as a challenge. It's not about simply winning. It's about solving a problem. They look at combat like a puzzle, a riddle they need to solve. When we would send our fleets with perfect formations, thinking we could predict every movement, they would look at our formations, study them, and laugh. He let out a dry chuckle. You see, we thought we were smart, right? We had battle AIs that calculated every possible outcome, optimized formations to perfection. It was all about logic. Precision. But humans? They threw all that out the window. They didn't want to calculate everything to the last digit. They wanted to feel it. They wanted to experience it. He leaned forward, his voice lowering to a near whisper. They would take the most basic tools and turn them into weapons. Sharp rocks, sticks, metal rods, anything they could get their hands on. And they learned how to use them in ways that defied all logic. And when they killed, they didn't do it out of necessity. They did it because they could. They did it because it was a challenge. Because they enjoyed it. The journalist felt a shiver run down her thorax as the weight of his words settled in. What he was describing sounded more like a ritual than a conflict. It was a vision of war far removed from the cold, calculated campaigns of the Empire. Humans didn't just fight to win, they fought to master it. Tell me more, she whispered, her voice almost reverent now. What else did they do? The veteran's eyes glinted in the dim light, and for a moment, he seemed lost in the memories. They fought with creativity, with instinct. When we'd send our fleets to face them, we thought we had them outnumbered, outgunned, outclassed. But they had something we didn't, unpredictability. They didn't follow patterns. They didn't adhere to logic. And they certainly didn't fight by the rules. They fought by whatever they felt would work. And it worked. He paused, his mandibles clicking in frustration. And that's the thing. We were so focused on perfecting our weapons and battle strategies, but they were focused on something entirely different, how to turn the simplest tool into the most effective weapon. They used everything. They didn't just kill with advanced technology, they killed with creativity, with raw instinct. It was an art, and they were masters. The journalist sat back, processing his words in stunned silence. She had heard stories of human ingenuity, of their ability to adapt and innovate, but this was different. This was not just about survival, it was about something deeper, something almost primal. It was as if the humans didn't just fight wars to win, they fought them to learn, to grow, to push the boundaries of what was possible. And in that way, they had turned warfare into something far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The rocks from God, the veteran took a deep breath, his posture stiffening as he prepared to recount the event that had made him truly understand the terrifying creativity of humanity. Let me tell you about our first engagement with them, he said, his voice suddenly thick with the weight of the memory. We thought we had everything under control. We thought we were ready. We had the best weapons, the most advanced technology, and the most brilliant military minds on our side. We thought we were unbeatable. He leaned forward again, his voice growing darker as he continued. But then, the humans, those psychotic primates, hit us with something we never saw coming. They dropped rocks. The journalist blinked in disbelief. Rocks? What do you mean? The veteran's eyes flared with recognition of her confusion. Rocks. Not just any rocks, though. Tungsten rods, to be precise. We called them rods from God. And believe me, that's exactly what they were. He shook his head in disbelief as he spoke. They launched them from orbit, using nothing more than gravity. No missiles, no bombs, just pure, unadulterated force. And when those rods hit our ships, when they hit anything, it was like the world had ended. The destruction was instant. The journalist's eyes widened in shock. You're saying they used rocks as weapons? The veteran nodded slowly, his face darkening with the memory. You have to understand, these weren't just any rocks. They were made of tungsten, heavy, dense metal that, when dropped from space, builds up enough kinetic energy to obliterate anything in its path. No radiation, no heat signatures, just pure force. We didn't know how to defend against it. We had no warning. No way to stop it. Our advanced defense systems were completely useless. He leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. It was the simplest thing. A rock, dropped from the edge of space. But it was the most devastating thing we had ever faced. No energy shields, no plasma weapons, just the raw, unrelenting force of gravity. And it destroyed everything we thought was unbreakable. The journalist felt her antennae twitch nervously as the weight of his words settled in. It sounded like something out of a nightmare. How could something so primitive, so basic, be so effective? They didn't care about advanced technology, the veteran continued, his voice growing more bitter. They used what they had, and they used it better than we could ever imagine. They didn't need our fancy weapons. They didn't need our sophisticated technology. They just needed creativity. And that's what made them unstoppable. The journalist's mind was reeling. Tungsten rods. Rocks. It was impossible to fathom. But as she looked at the veteran's weathered face, the pain in his eyes told her that he was speaking the truth. The humans hadn't just defeated the Empire, they had done so with a kind of ingenuity and resourcefulness that no one had been prepared for. And in that moment, the journalist realized just how dangerous they truly were. That's why we lost, the veteran said, his voice heavy with the weight of defeat. Because we never understood how they thought. We were fighting with science. They were fighting with art. Humans' ability to fight outnumbered, the veteran took a long, slow gulp of his drink, his eyes distant as he mulled over the next part of his story. The young journalist, still hanging on every word, couldn't help but press on. She leaned in, sensing that he was about to share something crucial. But surely, your forces were superior in numbers, weren't they? She asked, trying to piece together the discrepancies in his tale. I mean, you outnumbered them 10-1. That should have been an advantage. The veteran chuckled softly, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was hollow, tinged with the bitterness of hard lessons learned. He looked at her, his compound eyes glowing in the dim light. Ah, the numbers, he said, almost mockingly. We thought we had them. We had everything calculated, better ships, more firepower, superior battle tactics. We thought we could crush them under the weight of our superiority. But what we didn't understand, what we never understood, is that humans. They live for being outnumbered. It's their comfort zone. The journalist blinked in confusion. But how is that possible? Every other species, when they're outnumbered, they panic. They retreat. The veteran's eyes glinted with a mix of respect and disbelief. That's exactly what we thought, he said, a slight chuckle escaping him, but it wasn't light-hearted. We thought that we had the upper hand simply because of numbers. What we didn't count on was their cultural resilience. He paused, searching for the right words, then continued, his voice thick with memory. You see, humans have this mythos. A narrative that's woven deep into their culture. It's in their history, in their folklore, in their very blood. The story of fighting against impossible odds. Of standing tall when everyone else runs. They have heroes built around this idea. They romanticize the very concept of being outnumbered. The journalist raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Heroes? But, how does that help them in battle? The veteran leaned in, his voice lowering as he spoke. Because their entire lives are spent training for it. From the moment they're born, they're immersed in stories about the underdog winning against all odds. Their mythology is filled with tales of warriors who stand alone against armies. Think of their ancient battles, like Thermopylae, where they were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, and yet they fought to the death without hesitation. He shook his head, as if in awe of their tenacity. They have this mentality, this belief, that the odds don't matter. What matters is how you fight. And their children grow up playing games where being outnumbered is a victory condition. The journalist's antennae twitched in astonishment. Games? She asked incredulously. The veteran nodded. Yes, games. Capture the flag, paintball, laser tag, these games, they teach their civilians how to fight in situations where they are vastly outnumbered. By the time they are adults, they've already simulated hundreds, maybe thousands of scenarios where they fought alone against overwhelming numbers. And let me tell you, their minds, they are ready. He sat back, the weight of his words settling in. That's what we didn't understand. We thought numbers would win the day. But the humans? They're trained to thrive when the odds are stacked against them. And that, my friend, is a weapon no one can prepare for. The journalist was speechless, her mind racing. She had always been taught that battle was about strength in numbers. But humans had built an entire culture around fighting when the odds were not just against them, but impossible. She wondered how many other surprises the veteran had in store. The creative tactics of humans, the veteran didn't give her much time to process. He was already moving on, his voice taking on an edge of urgency, as if recounting the next chapter of the war made the memories feel fresh again. But you want to know the scariest part of human warfare? The part that really made us realize we were up against something completely different? He asked, looking directly at the journalist, his eyes flashing with intensity. The journalist nodded, her antennae standing at attention, sensing the gravity of what he was about to reveal. Their creativity, the veteran said simply, his voice low and heavy. That's what really terrified us. They don't just fight with what they have, they reimagine warfare every single time they step onto the battlefield. They don't fight with the rules we follow. They break them, tear them apart, and create new ones. Every time they face an obstacle, they don't just try to overcome it, they reinvent the very idea of combat. The journalist's eyes widened as she leaned in. How do you mean? What kind of creativity are we talking about? The veteran's mandibles clicked, as if trying to frame his thoughts before continuing. Take the Battle of Imus and Tori, he began, his voice growing even more intense. We had them cornered. Their fleet was completely surrounded. We had superior numbers, superior firepower, and better positioning. By every standard military doctrine, they should have been finished. He shook his head, a grim smile creeping onto his face. But the humans? They did something we never expected. The journalist was on the edge of her seat now, her antennae twitching with anticipation. What did they do? The veteran's eyes darkened as he leaned forward. They detonated their own antimatter reactor. The journalist blinked. What? Why would they do that? That's insane. The veteran nodded slowly, as though the memory still haunted him. Exactly. It made no sense. Why would they destroy their own fleet, their own systems, at the very moment when they were cornered and outmatched? But that's exactly what they did. They blew up their reactor and sent out an electromagnetic pulse that fried all our systems, and their own, too. Everything went dark. Nothing worked. Our fleets were dead in space. The journalist's antennae drooped in disbelief. But, why would they do that? The veteran's smile grew darker, almost predatory. To disable everything. Ours, theirs, it didn't matter. They knew the battle would be over if both sides were rendered blind and useless. And while we were scrambling to get our systems back online, they didn't just sit around. No, they launched boarding parties. He shuddered as he spoke, his voice trembling. Do you know what it's like to be on the most advanced warship in the galaxy and watch humans, wearing nothing but mechanical pressure suits, cut through your hull with thermal lances? No plasma beams. No fancy tools. Just really hot metal. And they were singing. They were singing while they did it. The journalist stared at him, trying to wrap her mind around the horror he was describing. Singing. But why would they? Because that's how they are, the veteran interrupted, his voice tense with barely contained fury. They don't just fight. They celebrate it. They turn war into something joyful, something to be relished. They don't care if they're about to die. They find a way to enjoy the chaos, to laugh in the face of it. And that's what we couldn't understand. That's what shattered us. He paused, taking a slow breath before continuing. But that wasn't even the worst part. After they had boarded our ships, after they had cut through everything we had built, they didn't just kill us. No. They turned it into a game. And not just any game. They reenacted our battles, turned them into stories, as if we were nothing more than characters in a play. The veteran's voice dropped to a whisper, his eyes flickering with a mixture of dread and respect. That's when we knew. We weren't just fighting soldiers. We were fighting warriors. And their creativity, that was the weapon that finally broke us. The journalist sat back in her chair, wide-eyed and silent, as the full impact of the veteran's words sank in. She had heard of human resilience, of their ability to fight when outnumbered. But this? This was something else. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about rewriting the very rules of combat. And that, she realized, was the true terror of humanity. They didn't just fight the battle in front of them, they reinvented it. And they always found a way to win. Human technology isn't primitive, the veteran settled back into his chair, his grip tightening on his drink as he took a slow, deliberate sip. His gaze grew distant, and for a moment, he seemed lost in thought, his mind drifting back to the earliest encounters with humanity. You know, we made a mistake early on. A big one, he said quietly, his voice tinged with a regret that hadn't dulled with time. We looked at their technology and laughed. We thought they were primitive, stuck in the past, still relying on ancient tools and techniques. I mean, they still use projectiles and basic chemical rockets, right? He scoffed bitterly. We thought that would be our advantage. But let me tell you something. That was our biggest miscalculation. The journalist's antennae flicked in confusion. But weren't their weapons inferior compared to your advanced technology? The veteran looked at her, his eyes sharp and filled with a knowing sadness. Inferior? Maybe on the surface. But that's the thing about humans, they don't care about having the most advanced technology. They care about what works. He leaned forward, his voice growing intense. You see, humans are not beholden to a single form of technology. They'll use whatever they have at hand. It doesn't matter if it's a plasma rifle, a ballistic weapon, or a chemical rocket, they'll use it, adapt it, and make it work. They don't let technology define them, they define how they use it. He paused, his expression darkening as he continued. We thought their reliance on simple guns, explosives, and mechanical systems would make them easy to defeat. But what we didn't account for was how resourceful they were. 1 minute, they're firing plasma rifles like we are. The next, they're pulling out some 100-year-old projectile weapon, an old ballistic gun, and using it with deadly accuracy. Or they'll use their quantum computers to hack into our systems, then switch to mechanical analog systems to bypass ours completely. It doesn't matter to them. If it works, they use it. And they make it work. He shook his head slowly, as if in awe. They don't care about keeping things sleek and efficient. Their ships? Not elegant. Not streamlined. They're clunky, over-engineered, and armored to the brim. They build their weapons like they build their ships, whatever gets the job done, no matter how rough or crude it might seem. The journalist leaned in, her curiosity piqued. So their technology isn't primitive at all? The veteran's expression softened, the frustration in his eyes replaced by a hard-earned respect. Primitive? No. Their technology is a reflection of their mindset. They use everything they have, they mix and match, and they adapt it all in ways we never thought to. And that's what makes them so dangerous. They don't stick to one thing, they use everything in their arsenal. Every tool, every weapon, every piece of technology they can get their hands on, and they use it with creativity, and that's something no one, not even the most advanced civilizations, can predict. The veteran sat back, his mandibles clicking softly in contemplation. We learned that the hard way. We thought we had the advantage in tech. We were wrong. We learned that when it comes to humanity, it's not about having the most advanced tech, it's about using everything to its fullest potential. The mindset of human soldiers, the journalist's mind was still reeling from the veteran's words, but before she could process it all, he shifted gears again. He spoke with a strange mix of awe and dread, as if he were recounting a story that still haunted him. You see, he said, his voice lowering to a near whisper, humans don't just fight to survive. They fight because they love the challenge. It's in their blood. They don't just fight to win, they fight to enjoy the challenge of it all. The journalist blinked, taken aback. What do you mean? How can anyone enjoy fighting? It's destruction. The veteran's lips twisted into a bitter smile, his voice dropping to a low, almost conspiratorial tone. That's where you're wrong. Humans don't see it as destruction. To them, war is a game, a puzzle to be solved. Every battle is a new challenge, a new chance to outwit, outmaneuver, and overcome. They treat combat like an art form, like a game they've spent their entire lives learning to master. He paused, his eyes distant as though the memories had a life of their own. After the surrender, after the battle was over, we were taken prisoner. And do you know what the humans did? They turned us, the highest-ranking military officers, into participants in one of their games. His mandibles clicked in exasperation. A paintball tournament. The journalist's antennae shot up in surprise. What? Paintball? Are you telling me that after everything, they made you play paintball? The veteran's eyes flickered with an emotion the journalist couldn't quite place, part anger, part disbelief. That's exactly what happened. They gathered us up, stripped us of our weapons, and handed us paintball guns. You should have seen it, soldiers, once in charge of fleets, now reduced to children's toys in their hands. And they laughed like it was the funniest thing they had ever seen. He let out a dark, sardonic laugh. And you know what? That's what terrified me. They didn't just see us as defeated enemies. To them, we were just another puzzle to solve, just another game to play. And they were so good at it. The journalist stared at him, wide-eyed, her antennae trembling. But, that's insane. They didn't take you seriously. The veteran nodded slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of the experience. That's what made them so dangerous. They didn't just want to win, they wanted to enjoy the process. And when you treat war like a game, like a challenge to be solved, you become something far more dangerous than just a soldier. You become an artist of combat. Understanding the art of war, the veteran leaned back again, his eyes growing distant, as if contemplating the full scope of what he had witnessed. You see, we thought they fought to survive. To win. But they fought because war itself is their craft. They don't fight just for victory, they fight for the challenge. For the art of it. The journalist sat silently, processing his words, unable to fully grasp what he meant. The veteran continued, his voice soft but full of an intensity that made her sit up straighter. Humans don't just excel at violence. They excel at strategy, at creativity, at problem solving. They look at the battlefield not as a place of destruction, but as a canvas. A blank slate where they can create new ways to win. Every decision, every move, every piece of technology, it's all a brushstroke in their masterpiece of war. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on the journalist. They treat war like a work of art, each battle is part of a larger composition, each fight a stroke of genius. They don't just seek victory. They embrace the challenge of it. The art of it. The journalist could feel the weight of his words, the truth of it sinking in slowly. And that, he continued, his voice almost reverent, is what makes them so terrifying. Because they don't fight to survive. They fight because they love it. They love the challenge. They love the strategy. And they love finding new ways to win. Every time we thought we had them, they'd come up with something we never even considered. The veteran's gaze softened as he finished, his voice quiet but certain. Humans are terrifying not because of their strength. Not because of their technology. But because they turn war into an art. And the moment you understand that, you realize that no matter how advanced your weapons are, no matter how many soldiers you have, you'll never win against someone who treats war like a masterpiece. The journalist sat back, stunned into silence. She had come to this station seeking answers, but now she had far more questions than she could ever have imagined. What she thought she knew about humanity's warfare had been completely turned upside down. And as the veteran's words echoed in her mind, she understood, humans weren't just fighters. They were artists. And that made them far more dangerous than any weapon or fleet could ever be. The mercy in war, the veteran's tale had left the journalist deeply shaken, her mind spinning with the strange mix of awe and terror she now felt toward humanity. She had always heard that war was a brutal, inevitable process, something fought to be won, no matter the cost. Yet everything the veteran had described painted a very different picture. Humans didn't just fight for victory, they fought with art, with strategy, creativity, and an almost joyful embrace of combat. But as he finished recounting their story, the journalist couldn't help but feel there was something missing, something else about humanity's approach to war that she wasn't seeing, just as she was about to voice her thoughts. A new voice interrupted her, a human voice, calm and confident. A man had approached the bar, his uniform pristine, the medals on his chest gleaming in the dim light of the station. The veteran, who had been lost in his reverie, glanced up briefly, then nodded toward the human with a weary smile, signaling his recognition. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice steady, with a strange intensity. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Your friend there," he gestured toward the veteran, "has some things right. But he missed the most important part." The journalist, still reeling from the veteran's words, turned to face the man, intrigued. "The most important part?" she asked. Her voice laced with skepticism. "And what would that be?" The man leaned against the bar, his demeanor casual but purposeful. "The kicker, as he puts it, of humanity's warfare prowess, is that we don't always want to fight." He paused, letting his words sink in, and the journalist blinked in confusion. "We prepare for war, yes. We train for it, we think about it, and we stay ready. But we don't fight because we love it. Not at all." The journalist's antennae twitched, her expression one of disbelief. "But you've just been telling me how humanity treats war like an art, like a game. How can you say you don't love it?" The man smiled slightly, though it wasn't a smile of amusement. "It's true, we love the challenge of war. The strategy, the creativity. But we don't love the violence. Not the killing, not the destruction. Our greatest heroes aren't the ones who wage the most battles, or who fight the hardest. They're the ones who find ways to avoid fighting in the first place." He looked at her, his expression serious. "You see, we celebrate our commanders who avoid war. The ones who find solutions without firing a single shot. The ones who prevent conflict, rather than ignite it. That's the true skill of humanity. We don't just excel at fighting, we excel at knowing when not to fight." The journalist stared at him, stunned. But you're so good at it. So why would you choose not to fight?" The man's smile faded, his gaze turning more thoughtful. Because we know the cost of war. We remember it. Every battle, every life lost, every sacrifice. The destruction, the suffering, it's never worth it unless there's no other choice. We fight when we have to, but our greatest strength is in knowing when not to. War is not something to be glorified, it's something to be avoided if we can. The journalist sat back. Her mind struggling to absorb the complexity of the idea. So you would rather prevent war than win it? The man nodded. Exactly. That's why we're the gods of war. Because we understand it deeply, not just in how to fight, but in when to fight. And the greatest victory is the one where no one has to fight at all. The true cost of war, the journalist, her thoughts still whirling, excused herself and made her way to a nearby viewing station. She needed to process everything she had learned, about humanity's military, their creativity, their ability to treat war like art. But as she stood there, staring at the large screen showing the latest news, her attention was caught by a report that struck her with a jolt. The newscaster's voice was steady but tinged with urgency. Breaking news from the Carina Nebula: human naval forces have successfully intercepted and neutralized a pirate attack on a civilian refugee transport ship. The attack, which took place earlier today, targeted the vulnerable ship carrying displaced families from the war-torn Riel sector. The camera cut to footage of sleek human warships moving in perfect formation, surrounded by vessels from multiple species, as they quickly isolated the pirate ships. The pirates' vessels were cornered, no escape routes available. The journalist watched, mesmerized, as the human forces moved with ruthless efficiency, but there was no violence yet. Instead, they were offering the pirates a chance to surrender. The human ships, hovering like silent predators, made no aggressive moves. What's this? The journalist muttered to herself. She felt a chill down her thorax as she watched the pirates, realizing that they were not being destroyed immediately. Instead, humanity was giving them a chance, a way out. Then the newscaster's voice cut through her thoughts. Reports indicate that the pirate vessels are being given an ultimatum: surrender or face total annihilation. Human fleets have deployed a non-lethal solution first, offering the pirates an escape route if they choose to stand down. The screen switched to footage of the pirates' surrender. Some ships, in a final desperate act, attempted to fight, but none succeeded. The journalist's antennae drooped as the reality of what she was watching settled in. The human forces weren't just taking down pirates, they were showing mercy, offering alternatives when they could have destroyed them with overwhelming power. Her thoughts swirled. They could have just destroyed the pirates, obliterated them like they did in their wars, but they didn't. They chose mercy. The newscaster continued. Humanity has once again demonstrated its remarkable ability to balance strength with restraint. While their military might is undeniable, it is their understanding of the true cost of war that sets them apart. They fight only when necessary, and in those rare instances. They fight with both fury and a deep understanding of the consequences of violence. The journalist stood there, her mind struggling to reconcile the two sides of humanity: the ruthless warriors who used everything at their disposal, and the compassionate, strategic minds who saw war not as a victory to be celebrated, but as a cost to be avoided. She had seen the art of war in humanity, their creativity, their ingenuity, their ability to make war a masterpiece. But now she was witnessing something entirely different: the ability to choose mercy, to recognize that the true cost of war is not in the number of victories, but in the number of lives lost. She turned away from the screen, feeling the weight of everything she had learned. Humanity was not just terrifying because of their strength, it was because they understood the cost of war, and yet they had still chosen to fight. They didn't just transcend combat, they transcended the very essence of what it meant to be a warrior. They were the gods of war, not because they fought better, but because they fought with purpose, with understanding, and with mercy. As the human forces continued to offer the pirates a chance to surrender, the journalist realized something profound: true power was not in winning battles, it was in knowing when to avoid them. And it was that knowledge, that restraint, that made humanity the most dangerous species in the galaxy.